Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So what if being a mankind idiot? One nation controlled by the media. Information age of hysteria is going out to idiot America.
And we are following breaking news. Donald Trump praising President Vladimir Putin for delaying Russia's response to the new round of U.S. sanctions. Putin says it will depend on what Trump does once he becomes president. This afternoon, the president-elect tweeted, "Great move on delay by Vladimir Putin. I always knew he was very smart." Already today, we've seen vans leaving the Russian compound outside Washington, D.C. President Obama ordered its closing and expelled nearly 36 Russians, claiming they were spies, part of the payback for Russia's cyber attacks and meddling in the presidential election. We're also keeping our eyes on the extraordinary security setting up around New York's Times Square, where millions are expected to celebrate the start of the new year. Cities around the world are beefing up security to head off any terrorist attacks. Our correspondents, analysts, and guests have full coverage of the day's top stories. Let's begin with the breaking news. And CNN's Athena Jones, she's in Hawaii with the president. Is there any reaction yet to Trump's praise of Vladimir Putin?
Hi, Jim. No reaction. In fact, the White House isn't responding to that or to this non-response from the Russian president. But those Russian operatives, those Russian intelligence operatives ordered out, appear to be complying with that order.
A caravan of vehicles spotted leaving this Maryland compound used by Russian diplomats, headed for the Russian embassy in Washington. The evacuation comes after the Obama administration ordered the shuttering of the site, along with a similar compound in New York, and told 35 alleged Russian spies to leave the country within 72 hours. In a surprise move, Russian President Vladimir Putin appeared to shrug off the administration's actions. After Russian officials promised a series of, quote, countermeasures would be announced today, Putin changed course, saying in a statement, "We will not create problems for American diplomats. We will not send anyone away," even extending this unusual invitation to the children of U.S. diplomats there, saying in a tweet, "I invite all children of the U.S. diplomats to the New Year and Christmas children's show at the Kremlin. Signed, yours sincerely, Vladimir Putin." The Russian president's decision not to retaliate contradicting his foreign minister, who proposed expelling U.S. diplomats in response.
The U.S. administration, without any facts, without any proof, declared a new wave of sanctions against the Russian Federation. We cannot let such escapades happen without a response.
Putin appears to be waiting for President-elect Trump to take office, signaling once again that he expects to have warmer relations with President Obama's successor. Meanwhile, the White House is defending and explaining its moves.
What these individuals were doing were basically collecting intelligence. There were intelligence officers operating here and using these compounds. We're putting forward a set of actions that are designed to respond to and impose consequences for Russia's aggressive activity. So included in that is this expulsion of these intelligence officers.
As for the operatives being kicked out of the U.S., the Russian embassy said Russia was sending a plane to bring them back home.
And among those being expelled, some based on the West Coast. The Russian consulate in San Francisco tweeting a statement condemning what they call an unfriendly and completely unjustified step being taken by the outgoing administration. And speaking of the outgoing administration, President Obama's critics on Capitol Hill have been slamming him for what they call years of failed policy toward Russia, starting with his attempt at a reset of relations between the two countries. Meanwhile, you have President Putin, who appears to be pushing for another reset with the incoming Trump administration. All of this presenting a foreign policy challenge for Obama's successor even before day one. Jim?
Athena Jones with the president in Hawaii. Thank you. Even before Donald Trump's tweet praising Putin, one of his top aides suggested that it was a domestic political agenda behind the Obama administration's decision to sanction Russia now. CNN national correspondent Suzanne Malveaux, she has more on that. So they're really saying this is all Democratic politics.
And Trump and his transition team are in lockstep with the talking points. The main one being here that the U.S. intelligence blaming Russia and President Putin specifically is faulty and incomplete. Despite the intelligence briefings that Trump has received and the additional ones that he can request, Trump continues to express skepticism over Russia's involvement, while at the same time lavishing praise on Putin.
Thank you very much.
Donald Trump tonight praising Russia's Vladimir Putin, tweeting, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart." Trump applauding Putin's remarkable move to wait for Trump to take office before responding to President Obama's decision to expel Russian diplomats and new sanctions.
I think we ought to get on with our lives.
In a statement Thursday, Trump urged the country to move on to bigger and better things, as President Obama announced sanctions against Russia.
I just want to thank everybody.
The president-elect and his team characterizing the current White House's showdown with Russia as politically motivated.
Even those who are sympathetic to President Obama on most issues are saying that part of the reason he did this today was to, quote, box in President-elect Trump. That would be very unfortunate if that were if politics were the motivating factor here.
Trump's team continuing to dismiss the U.S. intelligence assessment on Russian cyber attacks.
We've been talking about this for a while. I think that, all we heard all through the election was Russia, Russia, Russia. Whenever it came to anything Donald Trump said or did, it seemed most days. And now, since the election, it's just this fever pitch of accusations and insinuations.
These are amazing people.
Trump says he'll meet with leaders of the intelligence community next week for a briefing on the hacking matter. But Trump supporter, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, suggesting the president-elect not bother.
I would urge that President Trump, when he becomes President Trump, have his own intelligence people do their own report. Let's find out who did it, and then let's bang him back really hard.
Trump is now set for a direct confrontation with his own party.
Several of my colleagues have concerns.
As top Senate Republicans John McCain and Lindsey Graham prepare to hold hearings and consider harsher sanctions against Russia when the new Congress returns. But Trump's incoming chief of staff, Reince Priebus, warns the American people may not have the appetite for another conflict.
They may be privy to information that we don't know, but I also know that we're not interested in going to war all over the world either.
Meanwhile, the political theater continues to play out over Twitter. Trump immediately pinning his tweet praising Putin to the top of his profile, so it's the first thing that people see visiting his page. And the official account of the Russian embassy now has retweeted Trump's tweet, Jim.
They're officially on talking points. Suzanne Malveaux, thanks very much.
Sure.
With us now is former U.S. Congressman Pete Hoekstra. He's a Republican. He was the past chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Nice to have you back, Congressman Hoekstra.
Hey, good to be with you. Thank you, Jim.
So let me begin with Trump's tweet. Not the first time you've seen it today. Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart. I have to ask you this. Why does the president-elect insist on praising a leader who we know has committed atrocities within his own country and across the world?
Well, I think he's just making a very clear statement and distinguishing between the behavior of the United States, of the President of the United States, that made a petty decision yesterday with the decision to expel 35 Russians from the United States, and saying, the better behavior is that modeled by President Putin. Putin didn't
What better behavior? What better behavior did he demonstrate by hacking the U.S. election, annexing Crimea, backing a stealth invasion of Ukraine, violating negotiated U.S.-Russian nuclear weapons treaties? How is that model behavior?
That's not model behavior, but Donald Trump was talking specifically about the decision that Putin made last night, this morning, not to get into a tit-for-tat with President Obama. He recognizes the bad behavior of Putin in Crimea, Ukraine, and all of these types of things. He also understands the wild west of cybersecurity, this new cyber warfare, this new cyberspace or battlefield better than President Obama. He recognizes it's important. But he also recognizes...
How does he know it better? Because what's interesting here, Congressman Hoekstra, is that Donald Trump and his closest circle of advisors are isolated, not opposed just to the Democrats and the Obama administration, but virtually the leadership of their entire party. The House Speaker, Republican, the House Majority Leader, Republican, senior Senate Republicans pushing for even stronger sanctions against Russia. They all say Russia hacked the election, and the U.S. needs even stronger responses. You have a president-elect who was not even granted the premise that Russia was behind this cyber attack.
Well, let's start at the beginning here. We all know that espionage is something that the United States engages in versus Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Snowden even demonstrated that we do this against people like like the Germans and the French. They do it back to us. This is going on each and every day. It's the espionage business. It's no different than what it's been for the last 40 or 50 years. In cyber, it's a whole new battlefield. The rules are not that well written, and it's much easier to go after tremendous amounts of information with a much lower risk profile in cyber than what you ever saw in the old James Bond films and movies. And so Donald Trump understands that. And what Donald Trump, when he comes into office, what he'll do is he'll sit down with the folks and Republicans and Democrats in the House and Senate and develop a cyber strategy that will keep America safe and secure, a battlefield that President Obama has ignored for the last 8 years.
I just wonder, because as you know, there are many countries that have tremendous cyber capabilities, not just Russia, China. We've seen it with China, North Korea, Iran. Right. Why would those countries look at what Russia's interference in this election, see a president-elect who is saying we should let bygones be bygones, move on to bigger, better things? He has given no indication of punishment for Russia. Why would those other nations, including Russia, look at that and be deterred at all from attacking the U.S. Via cyber means again?
What the Russians did with the political campaign and the report that came out from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI this week was pathetic in trying to create a compelling case that the Russians influenced. All it said is the Russians most likely hacked into a political party's database, into their cyberspace. They most likely extracted or exfiltrated tremendous amounts of information, and most likely they leaked it to media for public disclosure. That's it. They didn't get into motive. They didn't get into intent or anything like that. That's quite a throwaway line.
That's quite a throwaway line there, Congressman Hoekstra, because I'm an American, and I listen to that. I hear foreign actor hacked into political organizations in the U.S., and they strategically leaked it out during an election campaign, and I hear that whether it's Republican or Democrat or any party, that sounds to me like something serious. Are you saying that that's just, heck, it's another part of this Wild West in the cyberspace, and we as a country should let that pass?
I'm not saying we should let it pass. Remember, Snowden clearly demonstrated that the United States hacked into Angela Merkel's cell phone, and we were listening to her conversations. So no, what happens in cyber is very, very important. We need to be very conscious of that. But the thing that we need to take away from this,
the U.S. didn't leak those conversations every day leading up to a crucial German election. I mean, this is the difference here. I find it's just odd for an American to be equating its own actions with the actions of a foreign adversary to justify them.
Jim, if you don't believe that we have gathered information from the Russians in cyberspace,
I'm not talking about the gathering. I'm not talking about the gathering. I'm talking about the selective use of it in the context of a campaign and targeting. Let's be frank, targeting one party during that campaign. That's the difference. The U.S. And here's the thing. I mean, there are distinctions in the cyberspace. Look at China, for instance. The U.S., I'm sure, hacks China. China hacks the U.S. But China hacks U.S. companies, steals intellectual property, and uses it for economic gain. The U.S. does not do that. Okay, and with Russia, I'm sure, yes, the U.S. hacks Russia, and yes, it's true, the U.S. was eavesdropping on leaders of foreign allies, but it didn't take the step that the U.S. intelligence community says that Russia takes, and that your Republican colleagues, such as the Grahams and the McCains of the world, and Paul Ryan and McConnells of the world, say that Russia did. I mean, is that not a different action?
Jim, the American public, you and I do not know what the American intelligence community has done with information that we may have successfully exfiltrated from the Russians, and where we may have used that to damage their national interest, whether it's in their homeland, whether it's in Syria, or whether it's at some of their relationships with their allies.
But is that your job?
Senator McCain,
is that your job? Is that the president's job to say, well, heck, we're just as bad as all the other folks? I mean, isn't it the president's job to put U.S. national security and the strength and defense of its systems, including its election systems, at the forefront?
Absolutely, and this is where President Obama has absolutely failed. He has not made cybersecurity of our government institutions, of the private sector. He has not made it a priority of his administration. And I've talked with people on the transition team, and I'm fairly confident, I'm very confident that Donald Trump is going to make cybersecurity a very, very much a priority for our military, for our political system, and for our private sector, because he understands the vulnerabilities. That is something that President Obama has never understood, or not even put a strategy in place to try to protect America's national security and Americans' national interest in cyberspace. This is exactly where the Obama administration has failed. You're exactly making my point.
Congressman Hoekstra, it's a fair point. We appreciate you taking the time for a second time this week. Thanks for coming on.
Yes. Hey, great. Thank you.
And a happy New Year to you.